Yeah, you can do anything you
but
want.
we can mute ourselves and unmute when we want to say something.
That's a good idea, Penelope.
Yesterday I was on and someone actually heard a small yapping dog outside my window that I could hardly hear. They wondered what this noise was. So it's amazing how it picks up sounds.
I have been much excited by the possibility of Dr. Fauci using Zoom to address the entire country.
Bless Borowitz.
Huh?
Bless Borowitz.
Yeah.
That was on Andy Borowitz.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just saying blessings to him. He made me laugh out loud, and very few things do these days.
Absolutely. All right.
Joseph,
I'm not sure who.
Joseph changed his coat.
Yeah, I
many
took the
colors.
robe away.
Hi, Richie.
Hi, Barbara.
It is my pleasure. I'm not sure there's anyone who doesn't know our beloved Soma, but she has always amazed me with the breadth of her interests, the depth of her interests, and I always learn something when I'm with her, and her enthusiasm for just about anything. She is a gifted artist. And I remember once looking at her and saying, Soma, you're a gifted artist. How is it that you are an engineer? And she said, look at me. I said, yes. She says, do I look Indian? I said, yes. She said, I have Indian parents. So she has since left Siemens and is doing brilliant work on an educational project called the Nourishment Project. Today's presentation, she's going to share the key influence in her life. And I had a preview and it's phenomenal. So, Soma, take it away.
Thank you, Barbara. Small edit. He is an influence, as are you and the people here. I do say yes to anything offered to me with gratitude, because that's how I learned. And the one thing about me is that I'm from Bengal, a Bangali. And Bengalis, except for Madhu, have a reputation of being extremely arrogant and unbearable. All true.
No one we know.
Oh, yes, me. But the one thing that gives us a bit of grace is the Bengali language, I feel. It is a very beautiful language, and I feel it's because it doesn't have many consonants. So it doesn't have that guttural sound. It's really lovely. And the apogee of Bangla writing, I think, is Rabindranath Tagore. The Western pronunciation is Tagore. And it's a huge honor for me to just speak of him. And if you haven't heard of him, if you are not familiar with his work, hopefully this will let you know why he's so venerated the world over. So an inheritance. Thank you. So this is Audrey Hepburn. At her eulogy, she had requested one poem be read. It's called Unending Love by Tagore. It was read by Gregory Peck. And I just took a snippet there. As I stare on and on into the past, in the end you emerge, clad in the light of a pole star, piercing the darkness of time. You become an image of what is remembered forever. I seem to have loved you in numberless forms, in numberless times, in life after life, in age after age, forever. So Tagore, as he's known to many, he has received the Nobel Prize, so he's often recognized as a Nobel Prize winner. He was conferred a knighthood, which he returned in protest for something that happened in India. I will refer to it later. So he was at some point for 4 years referred to as Sir Tagore. His volume of work is spectacular, over 80 volumes, including, but not limited to, poems, songs, operas, which he called dance dramas. His essays are magnificent. He wrote the national anthem for India. So if you've heard the national anthem, you're familiar with his work. He also wrote the national anthem for Bangladesh, and he is said to have inspired the national anthem for Sri Lanka. To me, I know him as a humanitarian, someone who also was a poet, who also won the Nobel Prize, who also was a knighted. He had traveled all over the world, and as you can see, he's been commemorated in multiple stamps. But to me, a brilliant humanitarian. And in the picture, as you can see, he's met many luminaries, he being one of them, from Einstein to Romain Rolland, and then also Helen Keller. I love that picture of him on the top left, where he's standing in Borobudur by the Buddha's temple, because I loved how he viewed the Buddha as a great human being, which I think they both were. So a little background, because I really believe his wealth created him during his grandfather's time, which is Dwarkanath Tagore, because it begs telling how he came into being. Dwarkanath Tagore was one of the richest, if not the richest family in Bengal. And this is during when Calcutta was the capital of India, British India. He was what you would call an industrialist, among many things. He also trafficked in opium. So no saint, but different times. He was reputed to be very wealthy, and he gave lavish parties. He was a spendthrift. But he also was presented at court in Victoria's court, Queen Victoria, and he met other luminaries like Charles Dickens. So Dwarkanath was also, what we would call the apogee of Bengal wealth, aristocrat in the whole sense, extremely learned, fluent in Arabic, fluent in Persian, extremely well-read. His son, Debendranath, who's Rabindranath's father, was also, he grew up very rich son, had a great life, and at some point he turned very spiritual. And I think it was noted to Dwarkanath's surprise and probably dismay. But he became, Debendranath, Rabindranath's father, became very spiritually moved. And he, at the most can be said, he really propagated what's called Brahmo Samaj, which is a form of religion. It came into being by this man called Raja Ram Mohan Rai. The reason I do mention him is Raja Ram Mohan Rai was the one who obliterated from Indian practice Shoti Daho, which is burning of the widows. Because of people like him, my widowed grandmother survived and wasn't sati. And the other thing that also definitely made an impact on Tagore, this Brahmo belief, they do not worship idol. That means a lot in India. So they worship the formless being, and you will see that effect throughout Tagore's work. So we move on. This is the house that Tagore was born in Jorashako in Kolkata, North Calcutta. And then if you see the houseboat, so the odd thing is this Nobel Prize winner and beloved entity from around the world, he was a college dropout. He hated school. He went through 4, and then he had at some point gone to University College London to become a barrister, which is a lawyer, dropped out of 2 years, came back. And so his father put him in charge of taking care of the family land owning and the estates. And he traveled throughout rural Bengal in that houseboat, which made him completely in touch with the greenery that is rural Bengal. And that time Bengal included East Bengal, which is Bangladesh. And so he had a home, and also in Shilai Daho. They owned homes many places. But the reason I bring up that picture, it gives you an idea of the verdant place of West Bengal. And it brings to mind when I see something like this, there's a very great poet, I think, Leopold Senghor. Was the president of Senegal. He had described Africa as dressed in your color, that is beauty, in your form, that is life. I grew up in your shadow. One might say that can be said about Bengal as well, because it made a huge impression on Tagore. So this is Tagore's family, some of them anyway, because he couldn't tolerate school. His brothers, he's the youngest of 14, by the way, his brothers educated him. And that is quite an education to have, because they were all gems. They were an aristocratic family, generations of wealth, generations of learning. His brothers were all luminaries in their own right, because they were truly aristocrats of the only aristocracy that counts, as far as I'm concerned, the aristocracy of thought. So his brothers translated Moliere. One of his brothers was the first one in the Indian civil courts of which was under British rule then. And I'll use my pointer. I know Ross had said, don't try to do this, but this woman is Kadamburi Devi, which was his sister-in-law, married to his brother. And the reason I point that out is all of these people educated Tagore, and that's Tagore on the bottom. We all have a bit of the peacock in us, so he loved to dress up and perform. But that woman there, she was 9 years younger than her husband, but similar age to Tagore. And there have been scandals about Tagore, none of which I care about, that they might have loved each other because the year that he got married, Tagore got married at 22. She committed suicide the same year. Utterly possible. But I must say, I love Tagore's work. I don't know or really pay attention that much to him. He comes to me through his work, and that's enough for me. So this is Tagore. As you can tell, he loved the arts, and there are small things I'll point out. This is when they have the money and you have the brain and the vision to do these. He used to hold operas that he had written and created in his house. That's his niece playing the part of Valmiki, this story of the Indian, from the one who was reputed to have written Ramayana. So there's Tagore dressed up, pretty little thing. We all do have a bit of the peacock, don't we? This is him when he was much older. You can see the Tashed Desh, House of Cards, and which he called his operas dance dramas. And this is just my belief. When his father had been to, and his grandfather and his father also had heard operas, and I have a feeling the opera that he might have heard, one of them being Wagner's, because Wagner calls his operas music dramas. Tagore refers to his operas as dance dramas, nitto natto. So I bet there's some connection there that this is what had influenced him. And the other thing that I found very interesting is in this picture, you can see the Oriental, or I guess now it's said the Japanese or the Chinese outfits of the setup of that play, or the natok or opera, whatever you want to call it. He was a great admirer of the Japanese aesthetics and the Japanese sensibilities. It shows up in Abanindranath Tagore's School of the Arts that Madhu often talks about. The Japanese influence is readily available and evidenced in there. So this is Rabindranath when he got married at 22. That's his wife. Her name is Mrinalini Devi. She was 10 and illiterate when he married her. So I often smile at the hypocrisy, or I don't know, complexities, one might say. A very, very educated family that were very progressive in their thought, yet he was married to someone who was utterly illiterate, but kind. And she was the daughter of one of the people who worked in their estates. Those are his children. This is Mrinalini. Her original name was Bhavotarini. They renamed her. What does that say about them? These are his children. And his life was tinctured with sadness. His wife died before he got the Nobel Prize. And I must say, there's very little I know of her, but she must have been lovely. She sold her jewelry to support him when he wanted to set up the school system, Shantiniketan, which I'll refer to later. And in the bottom here is Rothindranath, his one surviving son. Two of his daughters survived, and one daughter and one son survived. The little one here in that rattan chair is his youngest son, Shomindranath, who was reputed to be the one closest to him. That must have been hurtful to him. So his wife dies, then a few months later, his daughter dies, and then 4 years later, his son dies. And I think that level of grief and anxiety just, I don't know, bursts him into consciousness. It shows up in his work. And Rothindranath, I had a letter in my family that was sent by him to my family member. Diane has it. It's handwritten on the day after Tagore died. So this is Shantiniketan. Tagore, it makes sense, doesn't it? He hated the school system. He hated being locked up in school. So he spent his time and his effort. He sold his house in Puri to fund building this school in open air learning. It's a place north of where Kolkata is. It's called Shantiniketan. First, he started off with what's called Path Bhavan, which was K through 12. He then expanded it to make it a world university. So when he had first been to England in 1912 or 1913, he had gone there to learn about education systems, so he could import that layer of education to India. And so this is a picture of Shantiniketan now, and this is the Kala Bhavan. Last week's or the week before presentation, Madhu had said Kala in the Indian system is all the performing arts. So this is their Kala Bhavan, their performing arts building, I guess. And I loved how they decorated it all the time. So this is his background. And just a summary so you can put him in context. So in 1912, 1913, he goes to England. He carries with him a book that he had published, Gitanjali. Anjali in Indian language means an offering. So Gitanjali literally means an offering of songs. It was a book, a compilation of his writing, translated in English. He had brought it along with him. And in England, he had met Rothenstein, a painter who had painted him. I have a picture of Tagore's sketch. It's in Tate in London. You can see Rothenstein's work. The Rothenstein shared the book of Tagore's Gitanjali with Yeats. There is your beloved Yeats, Barbara.
Yes.
And it is Yeats who was so struck by Tagore's work, by the spontaneity of Tagore's expression. He then introduced Tagore to the rest of the world. And this has to bear repeat. So Yeats finds Tagore's work in 1913, and you can see wrote an introduction for it. And in the same year, he received the Nobel Prize. So the year that he was recognized is when he got the Nobel Prize. That's unbelievable. And, in context, Yeats later got, if not disillusioned, he was a little bit let down by Tagore because he found Tagore's later writing much more flowery, trying to be more English. I don't know. But one does change. And in 1915, Tagore was given knighthood. So he became Sir Tagore. But in 1919, in response to one of the British atrocities that had gone on in Jallianwala, a place by Amritsar, by that time, it was the Indians were protesting peacefully against the Rowlatt Act. But in the peaceful protest, one of the generals shot huge amounts of people who were just peacefully protesting. But keep in mind, back then in British rule, this information was suppressed. But news does leak out. And so at that time, Tagore was in Shantiniketan, away from all this nationalist movement, although he was extremely patriotic. When he heard of it, he came back to Calcutta. And because the whole country was in alert, everything was damped down. It wasn't martial law, but you couldn't really come out and protest. He wanted to find out a way, because no one wanted to get together and protest, because they couldn't. He wanted to find a way to really protest this atrocity. And so what he did was penned a letter to relinquish his knighthood. And I'm going to zoom in and read a part of it because I think it's important that we see this. So he's writing this to the Viceroy of India, and I'll read it out in case it's not very easy to read here. So he writes, "The time has come when badges of honor make our shame glaring in the incongruous context of humiliation. And I, for my part, wish to stand shorn of all special distinctions by the side of those of my countrymen who, for their so-called insignificance, are liable to suffer a degradation not fit for human beings. And these are the reasons which have painfully compelled me to ask Your Excellency, with the due deference and regret, to relieve me of my title of knighthood, which I had the honor to accept from His Majesty the King." The reason I say that is it's important that he did it as a protest. He wasn't protesting England or English. What he protested was the atrocities of the British government in India, because he does go on to clearly say he does admire, he's the one who titled Gandhi Mahatma, the great soul. But Mahatma and Tagore had huge differences in approach. Tagore was very not in favor of Gandhi's reputation of, give up, wear khadi, give up Western clothes. Because Tagore said, what is the benefit of just spinning this yarn? It does nothing for the intellect. It's the same bovine tendency of cows going and grazing the field. It did nothing for the mind. So Tagore didn't support those things. He supported patriotism and nationalism, but he absolutely spoke of that there's greatness in the British forms of thinking, that Victorian thinking was extremely progressive. What he rejected completely was the atrocities that were done in the name of government to the British East India Company. And it's also important for me that one knows that when Tagore did the Shantiniketan, he brought the world in. Because remember, by this time, he had received the Nobel Prize. He traveled vociferously. I mean, he was more gypsy than you, Barbara or Mara. He traveled everywhere. And the rest of you, you're all traveling. So he brings the world into his creations. On the top, you see a picture of C.M. Forrester, who was the Anglican bishop who really helped Tagore set up the arts and craft that Shantiniketan is known for. And then on the bottom, you will see, and I'm very proud of this, although I don't know the man, simply by the team of being in Illinois. This man named Leonard Elmhurst was an agriculturalist from the University of Illinois at Champaign, who Tagore had the great benefit of bringing to India and helped set up what is called Sriniketan and bring to life Tagore's vision of having a holistic village development. So the rest of the world was brought in with Tagore. So yes, he's from India, but he's not just Indian, and he's not just an Indian luminary. He's of the world. He's humanist in the truest sense. So the one thing that I always say, and people find it funny, I love Tagore's work, but I really do not espouse people reading it, because the beauty of his work is lost in translations. Bengalis, arrogant as we are very, very protective of the language because it's truly lovely. It's magnificent. All of Tagore's work is based on, it's very soft and melodic and lovely. It's also Sanskritized, and Sanskrit is a lovely language. It is so utter summation. You can send a whole sentence in one word. In Vande Mataram, for example, in the national language, there's a word called Shumodhuro Bhashini. One word to explain she who's sweet of speech. The summation that is found in Sanskrit is just lovely. It's a very telegraphic language, and that translates into the way Tagore writes Bangla. It's magnificent. But the one that I would only recommend if you must know of his work is The Religion of Man. It's part of the Hibbert lecture series in Oxford. And he talks of his belief, his whole belief of the formless universe. He brings it to bear. Science informs his poetry. I was telling Barbara before, this is why he has great conversations with people of the ilk of an Einstein. Tagore's belief was, just like matter, even though it looks solid, it's not. You have the electron and proton, separate entities, brought together by this magic, I don't know, magnet-like thing. What is it? It looks solid, it is not, just like humanity. We look like one huge thing, and we are, but we are made of individual people. And the bond that holds us together, just like us today, is love. His writing is lovely. If you must read one, Religion of Man is the one I would suggest. Flowery the way some parts are, you get the essence of Tagore in there. So now me, because I think what Barbara had said, why and how is he an influence? So I'm from Kolkata, Calcutta is how I'll always say it. This is the house I grew up in. That was the exact room I grew up in, actually. And most of you know I'm a bookworm. If I had to identify as anything, that's what it would be. This tiny little thing there, it looks bigger than it was when I grew up. It was just these two little shutter doors. That is what my bookshop was. My love of the books came from that little thing. And Calcutta, if you have not been, is not really what you would call beautiful. It's beautiful to me because I grew up it. And it's very busy, very crowded, very noisy, not really what you would call nature-based. And I had been back to it after a long time, 2 years ago. And her mother used to work for our family, and she now works for my aunt. And that's me getting my morning massage. Bengalis are rather indolent. We really love to take it easy, and we love it. We love books, and we like being lazy, and we like arguing. What Alan said, adda, chatting. So this is me. These two reasons I'm showing this is, my son said, oh, you had a brother. I said, no, that's me. And this is my father, who many of you have met. He was a Rotarian. So every Friday night we used to go to Rotary, and I used to wonder, why is it that he has a family of 9? He was the only one who really was all about volunteering and giving back. And I'm betting it's his influences of Rotary. And that is, as Ross had said, that is Mother Teresa. She used to come to the Rotary Club of Southwest Calcutta, where I grew up with. That's my sister, and there's me. Obviously, I don't know where camera angles are. She definitely made an impression later in life. I'm sure when I saw her, I thought, who's this old woman, and why does she keep coming? Things come in later. It just stays dormant inside us, and it blossoms. And I'm showing this because things that were available to me growing up really blossomed into being much later now. I'm 46. It took a while for it to come through. Which is why I expose my children to as much as I can when I can now. Most of you have met my children. So it's Kaya, Zen, there's my husband Ankur. And I realize now it's a great buffer to be married to Ankur for my children, because he's the perfect foil to the world that I live in. He makes it fun and loving for them. While I sit in books and songs, he just makes it fun, as their childhood should be. So how are we going to start? I thought, what is it that I want to say about Tagore? You can look up his works and read it, and that's fine. To me, he is what makes me love nature. There are things that are so inherent to me. I love nature and I love books. And growing up in Kolkata, which is not really nature driven, I wondered, why is it that I love it so? His work is redolent of it. So here's an example. In Bangla on the top, it says Bipul Torongore. And a translation of the work, this is not my translation. It says, in the surging sea waves, the infuriate dance of the terrible is rhythmed with his boisterous laughter, and my forehead receives the consecration of light. He had always equated, Joseph, you might find this pertinent, he always equated with the ocean as a realm of dance, constantly undulating, dancing forever. And this consecration of light, I mean, look at that stream of grace, the colors that show up in that. Every morning the sun anoints us. We're all naturally regal. So what I do, Barbara had said, I work with children. In fact, I learn from them. So I didn't want to show the consecration of light. So these are some of the children I work with. I love them. I translated that essence of that song into, can you see now? I translated that to say, and the morning comes with a golden wreath to silently crown the earth. The idea being, we are all regal. And I wanted to show one of the writings, so the children write their response, and they're 8. Tagore is eminently approachable no matter what age it is. His work is beyond fluid. It's divine. That's the right word for it for me. This girl writes, we were writing about gardens. A garden is the soul. And I loved how she said, all gardens are different, but they are the same because they're all beautiful. What is really interesting to me is, look what she did. She had written it first, erased it, and I suspect she wrote it in the best handwriting, children's handwriting, clumsy but lovingly lettered. It's just wonderful how he translates and transcends everything. And I show a lot more than just Tagore, but I introduce Tagore. It develops a love of nature, the biophilia that we learn of. And so recently, thanks to Miss Mara, she patiently teaches me about music, because growing up as an engineer, I wasn't really, books I understood, but music really threw me off because you can't analyze it. So for the first year and a half, like I was telling Barbara, it's a world that's unheard of to me. Well, unheard of is not the right term. I couldn't understand it. And it took me a while to just stop thinking. It makes me stop thinking. That's one of the reasons I love it. And I just respond to it. And so I recently saw the opera. Diane had first taken me to see the opera. So thank you, Diane. And then Mara really just helped develop a love of opera in me. I'm still new, but I do like it so. And recently I'd seen Wozzeck by Alban Berg. And when I like something, as Barbara said, I go down rabbit holes happily. And so I was like, who is this Berg? And I looked up his work, and it really intrigued me when I saw one of his albums and it had that Indian picture. I was like, what's this? And so can you guys see that picture of the Alban Berg with the Indian cover design and the jacket cover? So I was like, what is this lyric symphony? So I researched, and it showed that the lyric symphony was, he had said this is for Zemlinsky. So I was like, who's Zemlinsky? So I looked up Alexander Zemlinsky, and to my delight and surprise, Zemlinsky had used Tagore's poem, The Garden, as a leader for his song, the one he's most famous for, Lyric Symphony. I was like, there you are. Wherever I go, it's almost, Tagore was really influenced by these minstrels in Calcutta or in Bengal called baul singers. And the baul just sings to the divine. They don't worship any figure. And they just sing and dance to the divine as their lover. And there's a line in one of their songs, it says, Amar monir manush ache prane, tai heri tai shokol khane. In a simple way of saying, my beloved lives within me, and I project him or her everywhere. The whole world is a stage, and you make projections. So I go and find Tagore in the most charming places, then I project him all the time. And so, once again, through the Nourishment Projects, I had submitted a proposal for the Rush Hospital in Chicago for their Wounded Warrior programs. It's a program that this one is going to marry music and poetry together on war poets. One of them is Wilfred Owen, Dolce Decorum, beautiful writer. And it surprised me while I was doing research for that project. I found out when he died, in his pocket, they found a writing in his pocketbook. He had written in 1913, because he died around 1918. They found that he had written the poem by Tagore that was in that book, Gitanjali. And I bring this up because, Tagore pops up in my life in the oddest places, which I love, but also because I want to show translations are very dangerous. So I put the Bengali song on the top because the book is full of songs. And I'm going to first read the translation from the internet. And then I'll read the translation that I provided on the right. Not that my translation is better, but just to elucidate, there's a very difference in how you approach the translations. So the first one on the left-hand side says, when I go from hence, let this be my parting word, that what I have seen is unsurpassable. I have tasted of the hidden honey of this lotus that expands on the ocean of light, and thus I am blessed. Let this be my parting word. In this playhouse of infinite forms, I have had my play, and here have I caught sight of him that is formless. My whole body and my limbs have thrilled with his touch, who is beyond touch. And if the end comes here, let it come. Let this be my parting word. When I read that, when I had read it before, and if you suppose it that it was found on this soldier, it gives the point of view perspective of a human being. Whereas when I read it, and I'm skewed by nature, I translated it as, when I go hence, let this be my parting word. What I have seen and received is peerless. The received matter because it shows up right there in the word ja dekhechi, ja pechi. Lotuses reign in the celestial ocean and their benedictions intoxicate. At dawn's effulgence, let this be my parting word. In this playhouse of infinite forms, my thirsting eyes are quenched with beauty. If the formless one surrenders to my embrace and seeks my annihilation, I release myself to this omnipresence. At twilight, let this be my parting word. It mattered to me because the words here, although you can't read it, Jabar Dine, Din means day. Down here you will say Jabar Bala. Bala means evening. It also means time, the time of parting. So I think in the translations they skipped it. But it does matter. Because when you see this, lotuses reign in the celestial ocean, which it says, I have tasted the hidden honey of this ocean in the ocean of light. Well, no, to me, the celestial ocean that he speaks of is the azure sky. The ocean is up in the sky and the lotuses thereby are the clouds. And it's a play on word when I said rain, because when that lotus rains, it's the clouds raining to the ground and the intoxication is the water, the life-giving source. And that when you release yourself, when that flower blossoms, it's an offering to the infinite. So the approach, the perspective of the poem for me is nature, not the human approach at all. Does that make sense? So, and once again, this is how Tagore just plays hide and seek with my life. I was looking for pictures because, as I had said, Japan was a land of wonder for Tagore. And there you see him sitting under the tree. He looks rather the mystic. He does play the part with his flowing gowns and his beard. And in my class where I teach, I pulled up an example of a class that I had done way before I did this, where I talked about one of my favorite books, a book that I value, is The Book of Tea by Kakuo Okakura. He shows up in the weirdest ways. And so when I looked at the picture for this presentation, on the side it said, oh, something, and it mentioned Okakura had come and stayed with Tagore in Bengal in the early, I don't know, in the early 1900s, right? And it thrilled me to bits because it just reaffirms, oh my God, I'm reading something that Tagore valued. It made me so happy. And I find those moments all the time. It ties up to that inheritance I talk about. Like when you had come to my house, Barbara, once, and you came to this library back then, you saw that book by Mark Twain, Letters from the Earth, and you said, oh, my mother loved that book. And it thrilled me. Your mother writes magnificently, that little letter of hers in the Newberry Library with the photography collection. One could tell she writes poetically. It reveals a very intelligent mind. If that woman liked that book, and I like it too, there's hope for me. But in that sense, if you look at it, the one that I'd asked the children to review is, this is the part of the book that I thought was very important. So Okakura writes, in my young days, I praised the master whose pictures I liked. But as my judgment matured, I praised myself for liking what the masters had chosen to have me like. A master has always something to offer, while we go hungry solely because of our own lack of appreciation. And I think this is very a guiding force in my life, just like Tagore. That's why I say yes to anything anyone offers me. Because I suspect if you're offering it to me and you're my friend, I trust you, there's something I'm going to learn in there. And so to find him, that he knew Tagore, makes me so happy. And so here are examples of how I think this love of nature that I have, how it came about. This was from a song, and it said, at the frontiers of this green earth, I hear across forests the lingering notes of your infinite song. He goes on to write, the same stream of life that courses through my veins night and day runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measures. It is the same life that shoots in joy through the dust of the earth in numberless blades of grass and breaks into tumultuous waves of leaves and flower. If that doesn't beautifully sum up biophilia, I don't know what does. That we are all the same. It definitely made an impression of my life. I just couldn't voice it or recognize it till now. And so I bring to this concept of this innumerable waves of glass, one of the operas, and I'm not a fan of Tagore's stories. I think they're just not nice. There's a much better Bengali writer, Sharat Chandra. He writes beautifully. Tagore's stories aren't that great for me. Others love it, not mine. I think Tagore's songs and dance dramas are magnificent. One of them I bring up is John Dalika, which means the untouchable. And this painting is by Abonindranath, because Madhu had mentioned his name before. And a summary is the fact that the story was about this John Dal girl. Her name is Prakriti, which means nature. So she's very beautiful, but as she's untouchable, a prince wanted to marry her and she said, no, I will not. And then when her mother says, why not? She said, it's just replacing one cage for another. And so the story goes on. It starts off that they are going off to the temple and she tells her mother, I will not go to the temple to pray. The religion that keeps me stifled and keeps me in this kind of miserable life, I shall not offer myself or my devotion to that religion. So the mother goes to pray, and while she's at home, a Buddhist monk, Anando, comes and asks for alms. Because they ask for alms, he asks for water. And she says, I can't give you water, I'm an untouchable. To which he says, I mean, it's really, really lovely. He tells her, it's the same divine presence that is in me, is in you. Give me water. And so she gives him water. And the charm is, among many other things, by giving him water, which is the life-giving element, she who receives life, because she gets dignity from that one simple act. He goes on, but at that moment, she has discovered dignity within herself. And a beautiful woman like that, who really has that adornment of dignity, she falls in love with him. And the next day when Anando comes back, and look at the charm of Tagore, Prakriti, which means nature, Anando, which means joy. And in Buddhism, as you know, as the Dalai Lama says, we are born here for joy. that nature and joy goes together is just so appropriate. So Ananda does his rounds again, and she's waiting to see him as in a tryst, but he doesn't notice her because he doesn't. He does what he does, a monk. But at that moment, because he doesn't recognize her, and Drew, remember, she feels stung, and that transforms. We are complex creatures into arrogance and anger. And she's like, you will love me. And in this story, because her mother was a magician, tells her mother, put a spell on him so he falls in love with me. How humane. It's just human. We all make these choices. And the mother wants her, I don't want to, they're religious people, I don't want to do this. She demands the mother does this for her. We do make demands on our parents, don't we? My children try to, they fail. So the mother gives in and said, fine, but if you ever break this spell, you know I will die. Prakriti says, fine. And so the story goes, the mother puts a spell, and Ananda, who's a disciple of the Buddha, realizes desire and lust in him, which is an anathema to Buddhism. And he begs the Buddha to stop all this, but the Buddha doesn't, which is another lovely thing, because you have to work at your own salvation. The Buddha doesn't do any of this. And so near the end, you see Ananda come at her doorstep, and she feels jubilant. Prakriti, she's winning. She opens the door to him, and she sees that his face is wrecked with pain and anguish, because this is so not him. And at that split second, she's horrified at what she has done. She begs the mother, break the spell. The mother does. And he's broken free of the spell. And here comes Tagore benignness. And at that moment, he says, he blesses her. And the word that he uses for her, the last word is Kollani. Remember her, she was called Chandalika, the untouchable. Kollani is the closest thing that I could think of. The name would be, if you call someone Beata, which is, I think, a Christian name, which means one who gives benedictions. So to become from Chandalika, untouchable, to the one who gives benedictions, it is magnificent throughout, but each of his operas are. And so it's such a beautiful way of saying love is in the acceptance. When you are loved by another and you love the other, it comes through acceptance, to accept one as they are. And when we approach, and when we are lucky enough to have that love, we can begin the one and only love that matters, which is self-love. And then we begin that journey. And so in Chandalika, I took one poem from Chandalika, and I didn't do word-to-word translation. I just took the essence, which once again is the essence of nature. So it's called Phul Bole Dhonno Ami. And this is when she sings about nature singing, because remember her name is Prakriti. I serve the infinite spirit, cantillates the bud. Though raised in soil, there is no dirt within me. My petals a tingle at the thought that you will lean down, gaze upon me, and sanctify me with your touch. Accept me as a salutation. I think that was just the perfect way of saying all of life. And you put into context that the sunlight anoints all of us. All of life is in service of that divine. And right before she sings this, there's the part where she says that I will not worship the religion that keeps me in this indignity. Look at that universality for me, for this poem. Any child now, an LGBTQ child, who feels rejected by the Catholic Church, that does not accept it, or even a Hispanic child now, a Hispanic citizen, who feels rejected by the president, who calls his entire people, I don't know, rapists and murderers. And Anu, when we saw Frankenstein, I loved it, by the way, thank you for alerting me. We saw Frankenstein on the National Theater. You could almost say this is exactly the rejection that the creature was saying and aching for in his wanting of acceptance. His operas are universal and just lovely. So every year, some of you know, I make as an offering for my children, I make a book for them. So year after year, I create books for them in different forms. And I just wanted to give an example of Tagore's influence on me and onto my children. So I'm going to go through quickly a book that I'd created for my children in 2016. This was called Peace. My son, humble boy that he is, loves it because he thinks Zen means peace. So he thinks this book is dedicated to him. Yep. So it says for Kaya and Zen, and right off the bat, there's Tagore. Because you and I shall meet, the world is full of greenery. Because you and I shall meet, the heavens are full of light. And so I had translated one of Tagore's songs, actually. This entire poem is the essence of one of his songs, Ek Je Chilo Raja Tar Bhari Dukho. It's either his or one from Shukumar Rai. They all influenced, I mean, Shukumar Rai was influenced by Satyajit Rabindranath anyway. So it goes, there was a wealthy king who was very sad. That wealthiness and unhappiness can go together. And I used the character, and I did the drawings. I used the fox because in the Indian story, the fox depicts cunningness. And this little dog there was my dog, Kylie, my beloved daughter. So, oh, how he weeps, poor king, paranoid, practically mad. So that power can lead to sadness, which is anger, because the root of anger is hurt. Random imprisonments, unjustly met, be alert, and anxiety he can't forget. That authority is pretty much a form of fear. No peace can he find, poverty imprisons his mind. And so even though he is surrounded by wealth, the only thing he feels is bereftness. If he'd only open his eyes to the abundance that glistens inside. Stillness, nature can guide him to the place wherein rests the true wealth that one always carries within. Which at that point, when you embrace nature, the biophilia that you saw Tagore speaks of over and over and over. There is the fox now part of nature. And my dog had died that year. And so you see her now part of the stars. You can see her face right there.
Mm.
And then at the end, I say, at the end of the book, because I do it series after series, Aham Brahmasmi, which is this Advaita principles of we are all the same, which to me is biophilia. So I share with you this one, simply that Tagore shows up in different forms in me, because it's not Tagore, it's this love of nature. He is one of the many people. He's an instrument of the divine. It comes through many forms because he's not the only one. You need not read Tagore to get this idea. And so there are many writers now that I feel they are not derivatives of Tagore. They're entire gems on their own way. I just want to bring out two who I think are magnificent. If you want to get the essence of what Tagore spoke of, I suggest Mary Oliver. And Merle, I was introduced to Mary Oliver on a one-off. Donna Brookings said, oh, you might like Mary Oliver. Oh, I do like Mary Oliver. I love Mary Oliver's work. And W.S. Merwin. So if you allow me, please read Mary Oliver's work. I will read a little snippet of an eulogy she wrote for her wife. It's so sad she died last year. But you find her in her work. So she writes this about her wife. All of a sudden, she began to whistle. And by all of a sudden, I mean that for more than 30 years, she had not whistled. It was thrilling. At first, I wondered, who was in the house? What stranger? I was upstairs reading, and she was downstairs. As from the throat of a wild and cheerful bird, not caught but visiting, the sounds warbled and slid and doubled back and larked and soared. Finally, I said, is that you? Is that you whistling? Yes, she said. I used to whistle a long time ago. Now I see I can still whistle. And cadence after cadence, she strolled through the house whistling. I know her so well, I think, I thought. Elbow and ankle, mood and desire, anguish and frolic, anger too, and the devotions. And for all that, do we even begin to know each other? Who is this I've been living with for 30 years? This clear, dark, lovely whistler. When I just read that, I was stunned to be loved by someone of that capacity. I just marvel at what a wife must have been. The love unadorned of a tender soul. It's sublime. And then W.S. Merwin. So he writes, this is just like one line. After an age of leaves and feathers, someone dead thought of this mountain as money. He writes this because he bought land in Hawaii that he restored, land that had been used for mining. He lovingly restored it over the years. I mean, it's magnificent. Read him. I mean, they don't need any PR from me. One need not read Tagore. The essence of Tagore is found in so many other ways. And Tagore was openly, like many of his songs, his early works in Valmiki Pratibha, spot on copied the music from the Scottish songs. He said it openly. It's not appropriation. It's a form of respect. And so I wanted to give you what he does. He takes something and he makes it his own. He keeps the essence of it. So there's a poem by Robert Browning, The Boy and the Angel. And the summary of that poem is this boy, Theocrite, with curly hair. He used to work, and while he worked, he sang a song to God, went back to his work. And he always thought, when I die, maybe one day I'll get to sing at the pearly gates. I guess the Christian belief is when you die, it's a huge chorus for eternity. And so he sings. And after he's dead, and the choruses still sing to God, God says in heaven, God said in heaven, nor day nor night now brings the voice of my delight. Clearer love sounds other ways. I miss my little human praise. And so that you go from intellectual learning to simple realizations. And so Tagore says that you don't have to make anything grandiose. And unadorned love is magnificent. So he writes this song and he says the essence is from that Boy and the Angel. In Bangla it says, Tomar naam bolbo nana chole. And I'm sure we've all felt it when you love someone immensely and you murmur their name over and over again. So it says, I will utter your name under many pretenses, sitting alone under the shades of my thought. Say it without words, say it without hope, say it with a smile, say it with my tears. Without purpose, I'll call your name and fulfill needlessly my heart's desire. Like a child enchanted by her mother's name, feels the bliss of saying, Mother, Ma. I don't know. I'm sure we all have felt it when you loved something or someone so much, you just call out their name like a lament in the darkness. It's a form of longing. And I bring this up, this simplicity way of saying something. It doesn't have to be grandiose. So now I run my class online. And if you see in here, the students submit their work to me on the phone. I'm trying to zoom in on the picture of the iPhone. This was submitted to me on Wednesday. What I had asked them to do, this one was called Pains and Passion. Pains being the window pane, the stained glass window of King's Chapel in Cambridge, which is the Passion of the Christ. So the passions allude to Christ's passion, which is agony, betrayal, suffering. So I tied up the pane glass window with the Passion series, Bach cantatas, St. John Passion, St. Matthew's Passion. And so then I asked the students, reinterpret this, how do you see it? Because this Passion series of the one which is Jesus prays in the garden is the part where Jesus is praying because he's suffering. He wants none of this. He doesn't want this chalice, this cup of sorrow. He wants it taken away. And that's the point where he says, but if this is what you want, O Father, thy will be done. And so this one boy, he's 14. He redraw this Christ in the garden here, as you can see, that Christ wouldn't be in isolation praying in some evolved tower. He would be down in the grounds, working in the gardens, providing food. You find Christ in everyday life, in the humanity of life. I just thought it was brilliant. He then sent me, it took me a while, a rap song. It was rap music and it was not what I expected, but I listened to it and I understood what he was trying to say. That's his music. That's what he responds to. I'm sure he hated the cantatas. It was not normal to him. So I listened to what he sent. Some singer named Igor. Igor or whatever. And he's rapping. And at some point, the rap is heartache and earthquake and things like that. But you understand this longing that I miss you, I'm lost, I don't know what I'm doing. It shows off. And I just love that the same feeling of Tagore, that you come in simplicity, unadorned love. It's universal. And this person, I hope some of you, all of you get to meet him. Mara has met him. There is Mara with me. Diane has met him too. This is Ed Collins. I hope you get to meet him. He heads McHenry County Conservation District. Lord God, he lives and breathes what I think. Utter humility. He preserves nature. And he just sent me this email earlier this week. And I want to show you, look how this man writes. Tagore comes to me in all forms. So he's writing to me, and because my name is Soma, which means moon, he only always calls me daughter of the moon. He's allowed to call me whatever he likes. So he writes, this is how old ideas give way to new ones. In the tempest of transformation, in the crucible of change, in the metamorphosis that reshapes entire ways of thinking and being long established and thought immutable. That in this time of chaos, coronavirus, populism, Brexit, all of it, in this chaos comes transformation. That wait, by the time we'll be done, something great will happen. And I feel that in my bones. Somewhere out there right now, someone or something already formed, already coming into being, greatness forming to make lasting change. It thrills me with optimism. And so I find Tagore in all of this. And what I think I would like you to remember, Tagore was not that he was a great writer, he was. Not that he was brilliant in everything he did. He took up painting at the end of his life. You can find all of that. But to me, he was a humanitarian who worked toward making the life of his fellow human beings, uplifted them. He poured his entire being, his entire effort, all his money into rural development to make the life better for the people in Bengal and all over where he went. And so this is the one poem that I think is so topical, and I wish this to be true for all of us. I shall read it to you. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, O my Father, let my country awake. And so I had called this an inheritance, because Tagore to me is in a long line of people or ideas that we inherit. He belongs to the world, and we are part of that inheritance, and we are part of the legacy, that we pay it forward. And that's essentially what we are when the morning sun anoints all of us, that we are all divine. It in all morning prayers, be it the Gayatri Mantra, any of it, in any religion, it's about the light comes in, shines from within to dispel the darkness of ignorance, that we look within, find ourselves, that spirit of inquiry is the only inheritance that matters to me. And I'm so grateful for your time in letting me share why I think he has made such a huge influence on my life. That's it. Thank you.
Shama, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Let me stop the taping.
To hear you